I knew something was wrong the moment Judith handed Colette the thin rectangular box wrapped in shimmering silver paper. She wore that satisfied smile she saved for moments when she believed she was teaching someone their place. Colette's hands trembled as she peeled back the paper, careful not to tear it. She always tried to be gracious, even when she shouldn't have had to. Inside, folded with clinical precision, lay a maid's uniform, a starched apron, cleaning gloves tucked beneath it like an afterthought. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the laughter started first, a snort from one of Brandon's cousins, then a wave of chuckles rolling through their side of the room. Brandon lounged back in his chair, grinning. "Perfect," he said loudly. "She'll need it at home." My daughter blinked, her smile collapsing, as if pulled from her face. The tears came quickly gathering before she had the chance to hide them. I felt something hot and sharp move through my chest, not anger, not yet, but a clean break, like a thread snapping after being pulled too tight for too long. Colette stood there frozen in front of a crowd that had turned her wedding day into a spectacle. I rose from my seat without thinking. The scrape of my chair echoed louder than the music. I walked past the rows of guests, past Brandon's smirk and Judith's satisfied tilt of the chin, and reached the table where her gift sat like a declaration. I placed my own small box beside it. A simple wrapping, nothing ornate. Just paper and ribbon tied by my own hands that morning. "Colette," I said, steady and calm, open mind. She looked at me, red-rimmed and trembling, but she nodded. Her fingers hovered over the ribbon as if bracing for another blow. In that moment, in the hush that settled over the room, I felt the weight of everything I had prepared, everything I had kept silent, shifting into place. And as she reached for the ribbon, I knew the rest of this day would not belong to them. It would belong to us. Colette lifted the lid and the room held its breath as the past 2 years of my planning stepped quietly into the light. They never asked me what kind of wedding my daughter dreamed about, Judith said from the start. It should reflect their future, not her childhood, and no one challenged her. Not even Brandon, who smiled and nodded and said things like, "Mom knows how to keep things tasteful." She called it their kind of ceremony. Crystal glasses, a string quartet, a plated menu with ingredients Colette couldn't pronounce. I watched them erase my daughter's voice with every centerpiece decision. When Colette said she liked lilacs, Judith dismissed them as common. When she mentioned writing her own vows, Brandon laughed. "We'll just go traditional." Every time my daughter folded herself smaller, less opinion, more nodding, fewer smiles, more pauses. She started second-guessing everything, even how she laughed. Judith never called me Mariella, not once. I was the midwife or sometimes her mother when I was lucky. I'd delivered over 300 babies in my lifetime, but to her, I was just someone who didn't belong in a ballroom. I don't think Brandon started out cruel, but the longer we spent around his mother, the more he sounded like her. He started correcting Colette in front of people. "Don't say that. That's not how it happened. She doesn't mean that." Like she was a guest at her own story. I bit my tongue, told myself Colette was strong, that she would speak when it mattered. I prayed I was wrong in what I saw growing between the lines, because if I wasn't, then my daughter was walking straight into a cage wrapped in ribbon. Still, I smiled, posed for pictures, paid invoices they left on the counter without asking. I stayed in the background as Judith preferred. But that night when I saw Colette holding a maid's uniform in trembling hands, something cracked open in me. 2 years before the wedding, on an afternoon that smelled faintly of approaching rain, I signed the final page of a property deed inside a quiet office above a hardware store. The pen felt heavier than it should have, as if it understood the weight of what I was doing. When the notary stamped the document and slid it back to me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved. steady, certain. The house itself wasn't grand. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, a narrow porch shaded by an aging maple. It sat in a neighboring town where no one knew me well enough to question why I visited alone. I had found it after months of quiet searching, choosing it not for beauty, but for safety, for privacy, for possibility. I used everything I had, saved the modest inheritance from my aunt, years of careful budgeting, and the small consulting jobs I still took on, because sitting still made me restless. I never told Colette how much of myself I poured into it. She would have insisted I stop, that I think of my own future instead of hers. But her future was the one I cared about. It always had been. When the final payment cleared, I placed the deed into a folder marked with her name. Only her name. I had already arranged the trust documents, the legal protections, the clauses that ensured no spouse could lay claim to it. The lawyer who helped me asked once gently whether I expected my daughter's marriage to go wrong. I didn't answer. It wasn't about expecting. It was about preparing. I visited the house alone after closing, walked through the quiet rooms, imagined where she might place a bookshelf, a rug, a lamp, imagined her turning a key in the door without waiting for permission. No one knew about the house, not Brandon, not Judith, not even Colette. I locked the door behind me that day and told myself I would hand her the key only if life demanded it. And as she lifted the lid of my gift at her wedding, I saw the moment life finally did. Colette's fingers hesitated at the ribbon, the tremble still in her knuckles, but she opened it, not because she wanted to draw attention, she never did, but because I asked her to. Because something in my voice must have told her that this wasn't a joke, not another trap dressed as a tradition. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in soft linen, lay the deed and a small silver key. On top, folded carefully, was a note in my handwriting. Just one line. Wherever you go, let it be yours. For a moment, silence. Then a ripple, soft gasps, whispers crawling along the edge of the crowd. Judith leaned forward, mouth pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing. Brandon leaned toward the box and squinted like he didn't understand what he was looking at. "What is this?" he said, voice lower now, like he sensed something shifting. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "It's her house," I said. "No one else's name is on it." Another ripple. One of Brandon's uncles actually sat back in his chair. A cousin choked on her champagne. Colette stared at the papers, unmoving. Her lip quivered, but she didn't cry this time. She looked at me, truly looked, and I saw something in her face I hadn't seen in months, maybe longer. The smallest flicker of grounding, a weight returning to her spine. Judith's hands clenched in her lap. Brandon shook his head, a soft scoff leaving his mouth, as if he still thought he could laugh it off. I turned and walked back to my seat. I didn't glance back at them. I didn't need to see their faces to know the shift had already happened. There would be consequences. Brandon would not take this quietly. Judith, even less so. But for the first time in that entire exhausting day, the silence belonged to us. Colette sat down, still holding the key in her hand, like it might disappear if she let go. Later, Brandon would have more to say. Much more. But not in that moment. Not yet. The reception ended with strained smiles and stiff goodbyes. No dancing, no toasts. Just the clatter of plates being cleared and guests whispering as they slipped out early. I stayed until the last table emptied, then made my way to the lot where my car sat under a flickering light. I didn't expect to wait long. I knew what was coming. Upstairs, behind a locked door, Brandon was pacing. I could feel it in my chest before Colette told me anything. "You humiliated my mother," he spat at her. "Do you even understand what you've done?" She stood in the middle of the room, still in her dress, the hem slightly wrinkled from sitting too long. Her bouquet had been left somewhere she hadn't noticed. Brandon didn't give her time to answer before he kept going. You don't need a house in your name. That was for show, right? We can sell it. Put it toward something real. An investment. She said no, quietly, but without hesitation. He stared at her like she'd spoken a language he couldn't translate. Then his face twisted into something meaner, smaller. He tore off his jacket, threw it across the room, and shouted something incoherent, ugly. The door slammed behind him a minute later. Outside, the air had cooled. I stood with the car door open, hands resting on the frame. The building's back door creaked and I looked up. Colette stepped out. Her makeup was smudged across one cheek, her lipstick mostly gone. But in her hand, clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone pale, were the deed papers and the key. She didn't say anything. She just walked to the passenger side, opened the door, and got in. I started the engine. Neither of us reached for the radio. The silence in the car wasn't cold. It was something else. Something forming. As we pulled onto the quiet road that led out of town, I saw her glance at the key again, then tuck it into her purse, like something she wasn't ready to let go of yet. By the time we reached Millard Street, the sky had gone completely dark. We drove the last stretch in a soft gray quiet, the kind that settles after a storm, but doesn't quite trust the calm. Colette hadn't spoken since the night before, though once or twice I saw her glance at the folded deed in her lap, as if making sure it hadn't vanished during the ride. When we turned onto Millard Street, the morning light was still thin. The small blue house sat at the end of the block, its weathered shingles catching the sun in uneven patches. The red front door, bright against the muted siding, looked almost like it was waiting for her. I parked by the curb and cut the engine. This is it, I said, though. She already knew. She stepped out of the car slowly, like she needed the air to settle around her before she could breathe properly. Then she walked toward the house, not running, not hesitating, just moving, with the kind of quiet certainty that reminded me of her as a child when she approached the ocean for the first time. She opened the door with the key. It fit smoothly, as it always had for me. Inside, the rooms held their usual stillness. She walked through them one by one, touching the walls, trailing her fingers along the kitchen counter, pausing in the living room where the morning light spilled across the old wooden floor. She opened the fridge and stared at the stocked shelves. Fruit bread soup, and the thing she always reached for when she didn't know what she wanted. In the bedroom, she found the quilt I had folded at the end of the bed. She sat down on the edge, ran her palm over the fabric, then looked at me. It's yours, I said. Whether you stay one night or forever. Her face tightened, and for a moment I thought she might swallow the feeling down like she had at the wedding. But she didn't. Tears rose again, softer this time, not from shame or shock, but from something loosening inside her. She breathed slow and full, as if the air here belonged to her. The emails started the next day. Brandon's name lit up Colette's inbox before she'd even unpacked her overnight bag. First he played the hurt husband. Let's talk. You misunderstood. It was just a joke. When she didn't respond, the tone shifted fast. By the end of the week, he was calling at midnight, leaving voice messages that veered between guilt and rage. I gave you everything, he said in one. You think your mother can save you from growing up in another? I listened to one of the messages when Colette left her phone charging in the kitchen. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't need it. Then came the driveway scene. I was watering the basil when I heard tires screech against the curb. Brandon marched straight up, shouting my name like he owned the pavement beneath him. Colette wasn't even home. You're manipulating her, he shouted. That house doesn't change what she signed up for. I didn't respond. I just walked back inside and locked the door behind me. The next week, Judith mailed Colette a letter. Heavy cream cardstock, gold embossed initials, and the kind of perfume that clung like entitlement. I watched Colette read it at the dining table. Her face didn't move. At the bottom, in Judith's smooth handwriting, "You're throwing away your future over a tantrum." Colette folded the letter in half, then into quarters. She didn't tear it. She just set it aside and reached for the envelope that held the divorce papers. We filed the next morning. Brandon contested, of course, claimed emotional distress, accused Colette of being coached. He tried to push for a financial review of all her assets, including the house. That's when the lawyer I hired stepped in. I had chosen her months ago, a quiet woman named Helen, who wore flat shoes and asked careful questions. When Judith's attorney threatened litigation over property division, Helen replied, without blinking, "Everything's already been handled." And it had. The house remained untouched, the trust airtight. By then, Brandon's voice had started to lose its edge because the door he kept trying to break through wasn't his anymore. Colette started slow, one drawer at a time, one choice at a time. She enrolled in night classes at the community college social work, she said. Not because it would impress anyone, but because she wanted to help girls like the ones she used to be. Girls who kept shrinking themselves for love that demanded silence. She found part-time work at the youth center downtown. Nothing glamorous. But she came home tired in the good way. The kind that comes from being needed, not used. She cooked her own meals. Simple things, grains, roasted vegetables, soups that made the house smell like something warm and rooted. She painted the living room a soft, pale green. Not because it was trendy, but because it made the space feel like breathing. She bought plants she used to think she couldn't keep alive. Some thrived, some didn't. But even the dying ones got water. Every Sunday, I came for dinner. She set the table with mismatched plates. No centerpiece, no folded napkins. Sometimes she burned the rice. Once she laughed so hard she forgot the pie in the oven. It didn't matter. There was no chandelier over her table. No marble counters or wine fridges humming in the background. Just 2 chairs, the sound of soup being stirred, and a piece so quiet it felt like music. She didn't talk much about Brandon anymore. Or Judith. She didn't need to. One Sunday, as I helped dry the dishes, she said, "They always talked about building something big, a name, a legacy." She looked around the room, her life, but I think I just needed somewhere to be small and still. That's all I ever wanted. I nodded. Because I understood. She had a key that no one else could claim. A front door no one else could enter uninvited. A life where she no longer had to perform gratitude for scraps. It was a Tuesday afternoon, warm enough that the center's windows were open, and the smell of sidewalk chalk drifted through the halls. Colette had just finished leading a workshop on confidence with a group of teenage girls when Judith walked in. She wore her usual pressed slacks, a crisp blouse that probably cost more than the center's monthly supply budget. She smiled like it was a business transaction. No announcement, no appointment, just arrival. "I came to make peace," she said, eyes scanning the hallway like she wasn't sure she wanted to touch anything. Colette didn't invite her into the office. She stood by the front desk, hands loosely folded in front of her. Judith launched into the speech how she was worried how Brandon was doing poorly, how it didn't have to end like this. She said the words like they were lines she had rehearsed, not ones she believed. Then she tilted her head. That subtle condescension always folded neatly into her voice. "I know Brandon might have been harsh," she said, "but you were raised simply. This marriage could have elevated you, given you real footing." Colette didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just let the words land and then settle into silence. Then calmly, she said, "My mother never needed elevation. She gave me a home. You gave me a uniform." Judith opened her mouth maybe to defend herself, maybe to redirect, but Colette had already turned. She walked toward the side hallway that led to the reading room. Her posture was relaxed, measured, the way she always moved when she was done with something. Judith didn't follow. She stood for a moment longer, gripping her purse strap, as if unsure whether to sit or leave. Then she did neither. She turned around and walked out the same way she came in, uninvited, unexpected, and unnoticed by everyone else in the room. Later that evening, Colette folded the letter Judith had left on the counter. She didn't tear it. She didn't keep it. She slid it into the trash with the same care she once used to set the table for people who never thanked her. 2 years have passed, and the house on Millard Street has become something living. The walls are no longer bare. Shelves curve around corners filled with paperbacks and secondhand finds. Plants hang from the curtain rods, stretch across windowsills, breathe in the same light that fills every room. Colette teaches now, not in a formal classroom, but in the sunlit meeting room at the community center twice a week. Young women sit in a circle, some still hunched, some defiant, all learning how to hear their own voices without apology. The workshop is called Speak Like You Belong. She doesn't read from notes. She speaks from memory. I've gone back to the clinic part-time, just a few days a week, long enough to remember what it feels like to help someone breathe through pain. I still keep a picture of Colette tucked in my wallet. It's not recent. She's 17 in it. She's laughing with her mouth wide open. The garden outside her house blooms now untamed and bright. Wildflowers spill onto the sidewalk. Passers-by sometimes stop to take photos. There's no gate, no sign, nothing to keep people out, but nothing that begs them in either. She built that space on her own terms. Sometimes we sit together on her porch, no ceremony, just quiet. She'll bring out 2 mugs of tea, and we'll watch the light change on the plants she swore she'd kill but didn't. There's no rush in her anymore, no shrinking to fit someone else's idea of worth. She used to whisper when she was unsure. Now even her silence feels steady. The neighbors wave when they pass. They know her as the woman with the classes, the woman with the garden, the woman who always remembers names. Not the girl in the maid's uniform, not the bride with tears on her cheeks. That part of her story lives elsewhere, now tucked into a chapter she no longer reads aloud. And on Sunday mornings, when I walk through her front yard, the breeze carries nothing heavy, only the sound of someone who finally stayed.